I've got a real challenge for you on this module. Here's what I want you to do. The next time you're in a negotiation, next time you're working against a tough negotiator, I want you to hand them something. I want you to hand them a video camera, a flip camera, and say, hey, I'm trying to improve my negotiating skills. Would you mind taking a video of me negotiating? That way, after the transaction, I can look at the video and see what mistakes I made. Now, you and I know I'm kidding, but I want you to think about it. How many of you and I would benefit if we had a chance to peek in and look at a negotiation to see how well we did? Well, you and I know our opponent is not going to video us. You know, we're not going to hire a video crew to come along with us. But could we, after a negotiation, do some post-negotiation analysis and see if we've done all right? A good friend of mine, Bob Laser, I've spoken to before, identified 5 things, 5 ways to analyze a negotiation that you've just completed and see how well you did. I think you'd even title this, here's 5 ways to know if you've blown it. And if you lose on any one of the 5, it's going to cost you. Now, most of us aren't perfect. No, none of us are. So if we blow 1 or 2, we're probably going to be okay because we have strengths in other areas. But if you want to know how well you've done, you may want to pay attention to these 5 items right here. It gives us the capacity to look back on a deal, learn from experience, and see how we go from there. Here comes the number 1. It is, did you apply the Pareto principle when you negotiated? If the Pareto principle isn't common to you, then I think its definition is. The Pareto principle, Pareto was a 17th century Italian economist. And guess what relationship he came up with? The 80-20 rule. There's not many of you out there haven't heard of the 80-20 rule. You've heard it apply. How about this? 80% of the sales is made by 20% of the salespeople. In retail, 80% of the value of your inventory is typically tied up in 20% of your inventory. Land utilization, proper when 80% of the value is in improvement, 20% in the land. The 80-20 rule has so many applications, and it has a critical application in negotiating. You have blown it if you haven't used the 80-20 rule in your negotiating. Well, how's that apply? Were you doing 80% of the talking or 80% of the listening? Listen, if you want to be a better negotiator, talk less, about 20% of the time. And most of your talking should be questions. Did you do too much talking in a negotiation? It is one of my personal failings. I get involved, I talk too much, and I talk myself into a bad deal. We've got to start using the Pareto principle. Talk less, about 20% of the time. Get your opponent to talk more by questions and probing and expanding. 80-20. Talk about concessions. How many concessions did you make compared to your opponent? How many think the 80-20 rule is where you need to be? All you have to do after a negotiation is pause and think. How did the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, apply? Did I stay within those bounds of 80-20? If you talk too much, made too many concessions, then the bottom line is you probably blew it. And I've got one more 80-20. 80% of the movement in a negotiation takes place in the last 20% of the time. That means patience. If you rush too quick to a negotiated settlement, you probably blew it. Slow down at the beginning. 80% of the time is trudging along. Then it kind of accelerates and crescendos near the end. Another application of the Pareto principle. Let's go to number 2. The second way to know if you've blown it is, how good were you at, during the negotiations, reading your opponent? What's reading? Does anybody ever pay any attention to body language, word choice, pace, concession pattern? Are you, during the negotiation, this is tough, able to kind of step out, kind of an out-of-body experience, step away from the negotiations and look at your opponent and say, what am I reading here? He looks tense. No, he looks satisfied. No, he looks like he's ready to make a concession. He looks like he's never going to deal with me again. He looks like he's mad. Can you pick up some of those vibes, some of those body language? How many think it's their word choice, it's their attitude, it's a smile, it's a wrinkled brow? How good are you at reading other people? Guess what good negotiators are good at doing? Reading other people. How good were you during the negotiation to read the other side? If you're like me, I get out of a negotiation and said, wow, he really was upset when I said that, and I reacted to that poorly. You've got to be better at reading people. You've blown it if you're not good at reading other people. Here comes number 3. You're going to like this one. It's one of my favorites. Did you flinch? Did you flinch at the beginning? Did you flinch through every proposal? Just giving that little wrinkled brow, that quick, don't get overly dramatic. Don't give it one of these. Instead, if somebody makes a proposal, you just kind of wince real quickly, just a flag, blink your eyes. All of a sudden, the other side, make sure they're watching you, will pick up on it. And what are they doing? They're reacting to your flinch. They're reacting to your reaction to their proposal. If you didn't flinch once, twice, or multiple times during negotiation, you've blown it. Guaranteed you've blown it. And another thing you might even look, observe the other person. Didn't we say in number 2, you need to read them? How many times did they flinch? And what did you do when they flinched? How many think that's a way to determine how well you did? Well, that's 3. Let's go to number 4. Number 4 you and I have not talked about before, and I may not bring it up in any other module. It is the concept of escalation. Have you heard of escalation? Escalation is a concept when during a negotiation things start getting accelerated. They start getting tense. Things are lifting up to a higher level. It even can be when a negotiating opponent all of a sudden throws everything out and starts negotiating all over again with a new intensity, a new energy. Was there during your negotiation an opportunity for you to observe or to implement escalation? Did you take it to a higher level? It may start off with something, well, look, Mrs. Jones, I need to share something with you. I think we have the makings of a transaction here. I think we need to get very serious for a moment and see if we can put something together. How many think that is kind of a segue into an escalation where you say, look, enough of the posturing, enough of this bantering back and forth, trying to feel each other out. Let's put a deal together. Escalate it. And every once in a while, you can observe that in your opponent. You sense that they are ready to get serious. Escalation. Can you sense in a negotiation when things turn from fact-finding to hard bargaining? And from hard bargaining to good deal result? Are you able to make those transitions as you escalate through the various stages of negotiating? Don't worry about being too critical on yourself with escalation. Really experienced negotiators struggle to identify them too. But they sense when the opportunity is right, they can escalate things to a higher level. And here's the last way to know whether you have been in a negotiation where you've blown it. And that is, was it one-sided bargaining? One-sided bargaining, think about that. If you're in a negotiation where you're only negotiating one issue and you end up making most of the concessions to put something together, how many think that's a deal you probably should have walked out on? Have you, before the negotiation, identified your bottom line? Have you identified your BATNA? Have you heard of the BATNA? Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Don't go into a negotiation feeling you have to put something together. How many know this for a fact? Sometimes it's better to have no deal than one that makes you worse off than when you started. Once more, it's better to walk out of on a negotiation and put nothing together than to come out with a bad deal. We Americans are so prone to get on the bike that we just keep pedaling even though we don't know where we're going, and we're not making good time, and we're about ready to run off a cliff. If a deal is bad and the result is not going to be to our liking, how many think we should be able to end it? If you don't, you're going to find yourself in more one-sided negotiation where the other side is pulling you on strings like a puppet and you're simply dancing around. Oh, it's probably not that visible, but if you're making all the concessions, if you're doing all the talking, and if you're only working on one issue, typically dollars, you have blown it. You need to have multiple issues. You need to have them making concessions along with you. Look, review these 5 rules and see if you've blown a negotiation. No, you can't take the video crew along. No, you can't ask your opponent to video you or give you a comment on how well you did. But how many think after a negotiation you could always step back and say, how did I do? What do you suppose every technician does after they get through an exercise? They look back and say, could I have done it better? Coaches after the ball game look at the film to see where they made their mistakes, how they could do it better. We can't look at the film. We can't look for an observer. But I tell you what we could do. We could identify all those key points which we shared here that identify that you've blown it. I don't want you to blow it. I don't want you to make more than one mistake during a negotiation. But you've got to be on track to always analyze your own negotiation to see if you can do better. That's what great negotiators do, as they keep negotiating.